The rhythmic pop of a plastic ball against paddles echoed through the gym as Clayton lunged forward, eyes locked on the yellow sphere spinning toward him. His grip tightened on the paddle as he flicked it back over the net with a sharp snap. "Too slow, Clayton!" Jenkins taunted from the opposite side of the court, his smirk growing as Dr. Harris leapt into action beside him, sending the ball sailing into the far corner. "That was out!" Clayton declared, pointing at the sideline. Dr. Harris arched a brow. "Nice try, but that was textbook placement." Dr. Lowe chuckled as he wiped his forehead. "Face it, Clayton, we're getting smoked." Clayton exhaled through his nose, adjusting his stance. Not for long. The game had started as a friendly match, but as usual, competitive spirits had taken over. Clayton and Jenkins were both ex-military, which meant neither liked losing. Dr. Harris and Dr. Lowe, on the other hand, had a natural knack for precision. Dr. Harris with her sharp instincts, Dr. Lowe with his calculated movements. Jenkins served with a wicked spin, forcing Dr. Lowe to dive. He barely got the paddle under it, sending the ball bouncing awkwardly over the net. Dr. Harris was already there. With a quick step, she smashed it straight at Clayton's feet. "Damn it!" Clayton barked as the ball hit the ground. "That's game!" Jenkins threw his paddle in the air triumphantly. "Undefeated champions reign undefeated!" Dr. Lowe shook his head, walking toward the bench. "I'm just saying, next time we mix the teams up." "Nope, gotta give you a chance to learn from the best," Jenkins smirked. As they grabbed their water bottles, Dr. Thomas strolled by, nodding to them. "You all are loud." Clayton wiped sweat from his brow. "Just wrapping up." He eyed Dr. Thomas. "You heading somewhere?" Dr. Thomas gave a small shrug. "Session with Dr. Schmidt." There was a brief silence before Dr. Harris offered a nod. "Good for you." Jenkins took a long sip of water. "Hope he doesn't try to get in your head too much." Dr. Thomas smirked. "I think we both know my head's a lost cause." With that, he walked off, leaving the others to their cooldown. "All right," Clayton finally said, stretching out his arms. "I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm starving." "Portal briefing's in a couple hours," Dr. Harris reminded him, standing and rolling her shoulders. "Plenty of time to eat," Clayton said, "and maybe figure out how to wipe those smug looks off your faces in the next game." Jenkins clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Not likely, Chief. Not likely." The portal room hummed with energy. The low drone of machinery filled the air as the team stepped inside. Rows of monitors flickered, displaying shifting waveforms, temperature readings, and a real-life feed of the bright blue gateway standing at the center of the room. Dr. Chang stood behind the control station, her eyes focused on the data scrolling across the screens. On the table in front of her lay two frequency belts, one standard, the other slightly sleeker, with a more streamlined strap. "All right, let's get squared away," Dr. Chang said, looking up as the team approached. "Clayton, here's yours." She slid the standard belt toward him before picking up the second. "And Dr. Harris, this one's for you. It's a backup unit, but same function, just a better fit." Dr. Harris inspected the belt briefly before strapping it on. "About time you stopped making this gear one size fits all." Jenkins smirked. "Maybe next, they'll make one for me with a built-in recliner." Dr. Chang rolled her eyes. "I'll put it on the request." Dr. Lowe leaned over the table, double-checking the small GPS trackers embedded in their vests. "Trackers are online and synced. If anything goes sideways, we'll at least know where everyone snaps back," he said with a shudder. Dr. Thomas adjusted the straps on his own vest. "Not that we plan on things going sideways." No one ever does, Dr. Chang said dryly. Jenkins folded his arms and nodded toward the portal. So, Doc Chang, mind explaining how we know the air isn't gonna melt our lungs the second we step through? Dr. Chang smirked. Oh, don't worry. You're guinea pigs. We just cross our fingers and hope for the best. Jenkins let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. Comforting. Dr. Chang gestured to the scientists behind them, who casually stepped up to the portal's static edge as it activated, holding a small metallic object no bigger than a pebble. Without hesitation, he flicked it forward, and the device vanished into the fuzz. A moment later, the readings updated on Dr. Chang's console. She scanned them quickly before giving a nod. Breathable atmosphere, no extreme temperatures, no immediate radiation spikes. You should be fine. Clayton exchanged a glance with Dr. Harris. Good enough for me. Dr. Chang pressed a button, and a soft chime echoed through the room. All right, you're good to go. Same drill. Get in, collect your data, stay within sight lines of each other, and don't do anything stupid. Jenkins grinned. That's a lot to ask. Dr. Harris shook her head, stepping toward the portal. Let's get moving. One by one, the team lined up, locked and loaded. Clayton leading as they approached the static-filled gateway. The air around it crackled faintly, sending a ripple of energy through the room. With a deep breath, Clayton took the first step forward and vanished into the unknown. The static roared in their ears. A rush of cold air hit like a snap as Clayton stepped through first, boots crunching against cracked pavement. One by one, the rest of the team materialized behind him. The air was thick with oil, rust, and old smoke. A dry wind kicked up dust, swirling past the skeletal remains of buildings. Sunlight cut through gaps where concrete had crumbled, casting long shadows. Dr. Harris glanced around, adjusting the strap on her belt. No bodies. That's either a good sign or a really bad one. Jenkins turned his head at a faint rustling. A figure darted between two rusted-out vehicles, then another. Dr. Lowe exhaled. We're being watched. Clayton didn't respond. He'd already seen them. Shadows moved from rooftops, ducking low. From a half-collapsed alleyway, a flicker of motion. The city wasn't abandoned. Then came the noise. A sharp, metallic screech, followed by the guttural roar of an engine. A vehicle shot onto the street, kicking up dust. It looked like something out of a scrapyard nightmare. Rusted metal plating, chains wrapped around its tires, and a jagged, makeshift ram welded onto the front. It skidded to a stop, and before the dust settled, figures emerged. Clayton tensed. They weren't the welcome wagon. The driver hopped down, moving like someone used to being in charge. She wore heavy leathers and a pair of thick goggles pushed up onto her forehead. Her face streaked with grime. Her hand hovered near a sidearm. The others spread out behind her, their weapons low but ready. Then her expression shifted. Her eyes flickered over Clayton's vest, Jenkins' tactical rig, Dr. Harris's belt. A slow tension spread through the group. She raised a hand, and a few of her people took a step back. Shit, one of them muttered. Another gripped a rusted crowbar. You think they're gilded? The woman didn't answer right away. She just stared at Clayton's gear. Jenkins raised a brow. Something we said? The woman finally spoke, voice tight. Where the hell did you get that gear? Clayton didn't move. It's ours. A murmur ran through the group. One of the men visibly tensed, shifting his grip on a blade. Dr. Lowe shot a glance at Dr. Harris. This was getting dangerous fast. The woman took another step forward, eyes scanning over them again. The fabric, the stitching, the way it all fit. It wasn't scrap. It wasn't repurposed. It was new. "You ain't order," she muttered, as if trying to convince herself. Dr. Harris folded her arms. "Don't know what that is, but good to know." One of the men sneered, pointing a rusted barrel in their direction. "Then where the hell did they get it?" The woman ignored him, keeping her gaze locked on Clayton. The suspicion was still there, but now there was something else. Uncertainty. Clayton exhaled slowly. They needed to play this carefully. Jenkins muttered just loud enough for him to hear. "Chief, I think we just stepped in something." The engine above them revved again. The woman didn't take her eyes off them. "Guess we'll see," Dr. Thomas added. The silence was thick. Clayton kept his hands at his sides, feet steady. The woman and her crew didn't lower their weapons, but they weren't shooting either. That was something. Jenkins shifted slightly. Not aggressive, just alert. Dr. Harris and Dr. Lowe exchanged the kind of glance that meant they were already running through a dozen possible outcomes. The woman's eyes flickered over them again, but this time, she wasn't looking at their faces. "What's that?" She pointed toward Clayton's belt. Another one of her crew stepped closer, narrowing his eyes. "It's got a glow to it. What's powering that?" Clayton hesitated, but Dr. Harris answered first. "Battery powered." That made them all stop. A few of them looked at each other, then back at the devices. One of them even took a cautious step forward. "No steam lines. No wiring either." "Electric?" The woman's voice wasn't just cautious now. It had a strange edge to it. Something between disbelief and interest. Dr. Harris nodded. "Yeah, just electricity." One of the crew muttered half to himself. "That ain't possible!" But it was, and now they knew it. The woman lowered her weapon slightly. Not all the way, but enough. Jenkins let out a breath, almost laughing. "Well, would you look at that? We're magic now." Clayton shot him a look. Not the time. The woman's stance had shifted. The hostility was still there, but curiosity was creeping in. She was weighing something. She finally looked back up at Clayton. "Where are you from?" Clayton didn't answer right away. "We're travelers." One of the crew scoffed. "That's a load of—" The woman cut him off with a sharp glance. Then, without breaking eye contact with Clayton, she raised her hand and motioned. One of her people turned and sprinted off. Jenkins exhaled sharply. "That probably ain't good." The woman smirked. "If you really aren't order, then you'll come with us." She gestured toward the ruins ahead. Dr. Thomas muttered under his breath. "I get the feeling we don't have a choice." Dr. Lowe sighed. "Fantastic." The woman motioned for them to move. The rest of her crew closed in behind them. Clayton kept his eyes ahead. This just got a lot more complicated. The ruins weren't as abandoned as they first appeared. Clayton and his team were led through winding streets of collapsed buildings and rusted-out vehicles. Their surroundings, a strange mix of decay and makeshift repair. Steam pipes ran through the wreckage like veins, hissing every few steps. Jenkins muttered, "Place has got character. I'll give him that." Clayton barely acknowledged him. His focus was on the people watching them. They weren't just random survivors. There were structures here. An organized system. Men and women worked near boiling vats of something acritic. Others hauled metal parts to a workshop, belching smoke into the sky. A few children darted between the adults, each filled with the kind of wariness that only came from growing up in a world like this. Dr. Thomas exhaled. This isn't some random group of scavengers. This is a city. Dr. Harris nodded. And from the looks of it, a self-sustaining one. The woman leading them, who still hadn't offered her name, finally spoke. You're catching on. She motioned toward a large building with reinforced steel doors. Inside, now. Clayton went first. The others followed. The interior was surprisingly well lit by gas lanterns mounted along the walls. The air was thick with the smell of oil, smoke, and metal, like a blacksmith's shop that never stopped working. A man stood waiting for them. Older, broad shoulders, sharp eyes that missed nothing. He wore a reinforced leather coat with a sigil stitched onto the sleeve, a golden emblem shaped like interlocking gears. Clayton had no idea what it meant. The woman motioned toward him. This is Victor. He runs things here. Victor studied them. His gaze landed on their belts. You're not with the Order. It wasn't a question. Dr. Harris shook her head. No. Victor exhaled through his nose. Then you have a problem. Jenkins crossed his arms. Oh yeah? What kind of problem? Victor took a step closer. The Order controls everything outside these walls. They don't tolerate outsiders. And if they find you here, they won't tolerate us either. Clayton's jaw tightened. They'd walked into a bigger mess than they realized. Dr. Lowe spoke carefully. We don't want to bring trouble. We just need information. Victor narrowed his eyes. About what? Clayton didn't hesitate. This world, its history, and this Order you keep mentioning. That got a reaction. A few people around the room shifted uneasily. Victor studied them for another long moment. Then, finally, he returned to the woman. Get them settled. We'll talk soon. She nodded. Clayton exhaled slowly. They weren't prisoners. Not yet. But the feeling in the air said that they were being measured. And depending on what Victor decided, this could go very well or very, very badly. As they made their way toward the hollow vault, Clayton tapped the recorder strapped to his vest, the red light blinking to life. Log entry, day 1, in wherever the hell this is. We've made contact with the locals. Hostile at first, but things smoothed over. Jenkins almost got shot. Nothing new there. City's a mess. It looks like most, if not everything, is steam-powered. But there is a faction that actually knows about electricity. That's where we're heading. More soon. He clicked it off as they neared the looming structure ahead. The hollow vault was once a treasury, its stone facade darkened by time and war. Rusted pipes curled along its sides like veins, leading to rooftop wind turbines and massive, reinforced copper rods grounded into the earth. The so-called Vault Wardens had repurposed the old bank into a fortress of energy, a hub of flickering bulbs and sparking wires that cast the night in a faint amber glow. Their leader, a wiry man with goggles pushed onto his forehead, introduced himself as Felix Sproke, the prime warden of the Hollow Vault. His people, clad in patched leather and brass-trimmed coats, carried an assortment of homemade weapons, insulated gloves, and toolkits hanging from their belts. You're not from around here, Felix stated, his gaze scanning their gear. Then his eyes landed on the belts. And those run on electricity. Dr. Harris nodded. Battery-powered. A murmur rippled through the Vault Wardens. Some looked skeptical, others intrigued. Felix's fingers twitched with curiosity. Real batteries? Not siphon charge? You've got to tell me more about that. They spent some time inside the vault, surrounded by walls lined with salvaged circuit boards, copper wiring, and half-repaired generators. The Vault Wardens weren't just scavengers. They were preservationists of electric technology, experimenting, rebuilding, and fighting to keep the power alive. After exchanging enough information to gain their trust, and dodging more than a few attempts to dismantle the belts for study, the team was led back out into the city, toward a safe house in the suburbs where they could rest. Log entry. Still day 1. Met a group called the Vault Wardens. Real tech heads. Keeping electricity alive in this place. Their leader, Felix Sproke, nearly had a meltdown when he saw our belts. Had to shut down his idea of taking them apart real quick. Learned a bit about how they keep the lights on, but there's a bigger picture we don't have yet. They mentioned the CME decades ago, and the Order with their Ethereum tech. Heading to a safe house now. Could use some rest, but something tells me we won't get much of it. The sky was a deep, smoky blue, city lights barely flickering in the distance. The farther they walked, the darker it became. Then, the silence broke. A scream, cut short. Jenkins snapped his rifle up. We're not alone! Then the streets erupted. Figures moved in the dark, shadows slipping between ruined buildings, rifles clicking, blades catching the faint glow of the distant hollow vault. The Gilded Order had found them, and they weren't here to talk. The attack came without warning. 1 second, Clayton and his team were navigating the dimly lit streets, led by a few local guards toward the safe house. The next, the night exploded with streaks of yellow light cutting through the mist like lasers. Jenkins was the first to react. Cover! He barked, shoving Dr. Harris behind the crumbling remains of a brick storefront. Dr. Lowe dove to the side, rolling as the street erupted with Ethereum-charged energy bolts, searing the air with a sickly hum. Then they saw them. A squad of black-clad enforcers emerged from the gloom, their armor sleek, featureless, and threaded with pulsing veins of yellow light. The glow wasn't just for show. It flickered in rhythm with their movements, like a second circulatory system. Their helmets had no visors, no openings, just a smooth, opaque shell that reflected nothing, and they moved fast. Clayton drew his sidearm and fired, but the bullets sparked harmlessly against the enforcer's armor. Damn it! He muttered. Their tech was beyond anything the team was ready for. Jenkins gritted his teeth. We ain't winning this head-on, Chief! He pivoted, launching a counterattack, using short, controlled bursts, forcing the enforcers to adjust their approach, but it was like trying to hold back a tidal wave. Dr. Harris yanked the scanner from her belt, her fingers moving fast. The belts! Something's interfering! It's freaking out! As if on cue, Clayton's belt flickered. A dull warning tone sounded from its interface. He knew what that meant. If they lost frequency stability, they weren't getting back safe. Ethereum. The realization hit hard. The Gilded Order's tech was disrupting their belts, cutting off their chances and hopes of a safe escape. Then the enforcers switched tactics. Instead of gunfire, they activated something worse. A deep, reverberating hum filled the air. Felt more than heard. Clayton staggered, his vision doubling. Dr. Lowe clutched his ears, shaking his head as if trying to fight off vertigo. The sound was resonating through their bones. Jenkins cursed. "They're using damn sound weapons against us!" One by one, the team dropped. Clayton fought to stay conscious, but his body refused. His last sight was the enforcers closing in, their yellow-lit forms shifting into abstract blurs before everything went dark. When he came to, he was moving. The low rumble of an engine vibrated beneath him. The rumble of the transport was steady, a low mechanical growl beneath their feet. Clayton's head throbbed as he fully regained consciousness, wrists bound with smooth, cold restraints that pulsed faintly with an internal current. Across from him, Jenkins sat rigid, jaw tight, with Dr. Thomas leaning against him like a sack of potatoes. Dr. Harris and Dr. Lowe were slumped against the transport's cold metal interior, their faces pale under the flickering yellow light. Outside, the city was slipping away. The barred windows showed the last traces of moonlight glinting off ruined buildings before the vehicle dipped downward, descending into a massive tunnel carved into the earth. The moment they crossed the threshold, the outside world vanished, swallowed by a sickly glow of Ethereum-infused metal. The walls of the tunnel pulsed with deep veins of molten gold, lines of light streaked in intricate patterns like circuitry. The deeper they went, the more intense the glow became, bathing the interior of the transport in an eerie, shifting yellow haze. Overhead, massive conduits ran along the ceiling, humming softly, feeding power to something deeper below. Clayton felt the shift in pressure, a subtle tightening in his chest. They were going deep. Jenkins exhaled sharply. "Underground city," he muttered. "They built themselves a damn empire under the ruins." Dr. Harris, still groggy, managed a weak nod. "Ethereum powered. Whole damn place must run on it." Her voice was hoarse. "Explains why they don't come up much." The transport continued its descent, the walls outside giving way to vast subterranean chambers, open expanses lined with towering structures. The buildings were sleek but unnatural, stitched together with dark stone and glowing veins of Ethereum, a fusion of ancient architecture and advanced energy tech. Bridges stretched over bottomless chasms, where more veins of yellow light shimmered like rivers of molten gold. Massive, rotating turbines fed off the power, their deep thrum resonating through the cavern. The Gilded Order hadn't just gone underground. They had thrived down there. Then the transport slowed, approaching a towering structure reinforced with thick glowing barriers. A checkpoint. More of the black-armored enforcers stood in formation, faceless helmets reflecting the golden light of the tunnel. Clayton's gut twisted. They weren't just being taken prisoner. They were being processed. The first thing Clayton noticed was the cold, not just the temperature, though the air had a sterile, metallic chill, but the overwhelming, calculated efficiency of everything around him. The walls gleamed with polished steel, illuminated by thin streaks of yellow Ethereum lines that pulsed like veins of liquid fire. The low hum of energy coursing through the facility made the silence feel even heavier. His wrists ached from the restraints clamping tightly around them. Their belts had been confiscated, along with their weapons and anything else that could be considered a tool. The Gilded Order had them exactly where they wanted them. Log update. End of day 1. Not much to say here. Except we're locked down in some kind of underground detention center. Everything is clean, controlled, and humming with power. This Ethereum tech is everywhere, lighting up the walls, the floor, hell. Even the guards' armor looks like something out of a dystopian fever dream. Black suits with yellow streamlines, moving in perfect sync like they're an organism instead of individuals. Feels like we're trapped inside a machine. We've been separated for processing. They took our belts. That's a problem. If we don't get them back, we're not getting home safely. Jenkins is probably already planning a breakout. Dr. Harris is analyzing everything. Dr. Lowe's trying to keep everyone calm. And Dr. Thomas? I have no idea. I don't even know where they took him. Need to stay sharp. We don't know how long we're going to be in here. The first interrogation started within hours. Clayton was led into a small, windowless room with nothing but a table and 2 chairs. As he was patted down, his personal recorder was taken. The lights overhead buzzed softly, casting a clinical glow over the steel surface. Across from him sat a woman dressed in a pristine uniform, her face unreadable. She wore the same sleek black armor, but without a helmet. Her dark hair was braided back tightly, and her eyes carried the confidence of someone who never had to raise their voice to command attention. She placed a small device on the table. It flickered to life, showing a holographic display. Images of the team's equipment, their belts, and worst of all, their weapons. "Where did you get this technology?" she asked. Her voice was smooth, but there was no warmth behind it. Clayton leaned back, keeping his expression neutral. "We built it." She tilted her head slightly. "A lie. Try again." "We found it?" Clayton said with a smirk. "We'll try this again tomorrow," she said before pointing a pen-like device at him. He saw a yellow flash and then darkness. He woke up back in his cell with a pounding headache. "Ugh, I've had worse first dates," he commented to himself. The time passed slowly, marked by a repetitive cycle. Interrogation, confinement, and the occasional return to the same sterile common area where the team would gather, trade whispers, and compare notes. "I'm leaving a 1-star review, and the room service sucks." "No turn-down service," Jenkins said with a smirk. Dr. Lowe was the first to notice the equipment's reaction. "The air's messing with the belts," he whispered when they were alone in the common area. "The Ethereum is interfering with the tech." "My cell is next to the room with our equipment. I saw them buzzing and sparking on my way to my first fun talk. If we manage to get them back, they might not even work properly." "So we're screwed," Dr. Thomas muttered. "Not yet," Dr. Harris replied. "We just need time." Time. Clayton wasn't sure how much of that they had left. Then, on the morning of the 4th day, everything changed. The alarms blared, the lights flickered, and the facility trembled as if something had just torn through the walls. The explosion rocked the facility like a thunderclap from the underworld itself. The flickering yellow light of the Ethereum conduits pulsed wildly, sending erratic streaks of energy through the walls and ceiling. A low, reverberating hum filled the air, rising into a piercing whine as something deep within the detention center overloaded. Clayton barely had time to process it before Jenkins' voice cut through the chaos. "Time to go, Chief!" Dr. Lowe was already moving, shoving Dr. Harris forward as another tremor shook the building. The air smelled of ozone and burnt metal. Somewhere behind them, security alarms shrieked, their mechanical wails swallowed by the sound of more rupturing conduits. "Belts! Where the hell are our belts? Dr. Thomas gasped, his eyes scanning the lab where their gear had been confiscated. There! Dr. Lowe pointed toward the reinforced containment unit, Ethereum veins pulsing erratically around it. Clayton didn't hesitate. He surged forward, dodging a jagged chunk of collapsing ceiling, and slammed his fist against the release panel. The case hissed open, revealing their frequency belts, weapons, and his recording device. Dr. Harris snatched her belt first, fumbling as she secured it around her waist. Something's wrong, she muttered, pressing at the controls. The power is fluctuating. A pulse of golden light crackled through the air, Ethereum surging out of control. Sparks leapt from the conduits, skittering across the metal floor. Clayton grabbed his recorder and clipped it back to his chest. We need to... Then it happened. The belts flared to life, arcs of unstable energy snaking across the room. The moment the team secured them, the feedback loop surged straight into the Ethereum grid. The entire facility pulsed like a living thing before a shockwave erupted from the belts themselves, blasting outward in a golden burst of destruction. Both Clayton and Dr. Harris ripped off the belts and threw them in response. The reinforced storage doors across the room burst open under the force of the detonation. Inside, their remaining gear, uniforms, weapons, rations, were scattered across the now burning floor, but they barely had a second to register it. A second pulse ripped through the room, knocking them all off their feet. The pressure in the air shifted, their ears popped, and then pain. A searing, bone-deep pain that dug its claws into Clayton's body. His muscles locked, his breath caught in his throat. The world around him blurred, colors bleeding into one another like a dying fire. Somewhere nearby, Dr. Lowe gritted his teeth and forced out, "Here we go. Prepare for the pain!" One by one, the team vanished. A deafening crack echoed through the collapsing facility as reality itself snapped, followed by nothing. Nothing but darkness. And then, cold, wet, the rancid scent of stagnant water. Clayton gasped, choking as he flailed in a thick, murky swamp. His head broke the surface, lungs screaming for air. The sky overhead was dark, clouds rolling like bruised flesh across the heavens. The surrounding trees loomed like skeletal fingers, their twisted branches gnarled and clawing. He tried to move, but his body felt heavy, sluggish. Something slithered beneath the water near his legs, and a deep, guttural croak echoed from the dense foliage ahead. Clayton sucked in a sharp breath, forcing himself to focus. Instinctively, his hand went to his chest, fingers searching for his recorder. He found it, still clipped to his vest. Relief flickered through him as he flipped the switch. Silence. His jaw clenched. He shook it, tapped the side. Nothing. The thing was dead, fried, useless. Clayton exhaled through his nose. Figures. Wherever he was, it sure as hell wasn't home. "Hey, y'all alright?" A voice came from beyond the foliage. "Damn, Carl! How you suppose he got himself way the hell out here?" Another voice joined in as an aluminum fishing boat came into view. You wouldn't believe me if I told you," Clayton said with a groan. "Where am I, by the way?" "The good old swamps of Louisiana. Good thing you caught us fishing today," Carl replied. Clayton hopped in the boat and was taken to the docks, and the locals gave him a ride toward the local town. On the way, a black SUV stopped in front of the old truck. A man in tactical gear stepped out with a megaphone. "Mr. Ward, is that you in there?" Clayton got out of the truck. "Present," he said with an exhausted tone. The man reached into the cab for a satellite phone and held it in the air. "It's for you." Clayton walked over at a hurried pace and took the phone. "Hello?" "Thank God, Clayton! Are you all right?" came the voice of Dr. Chang. "Yeah, I'm fine. But the recorder's dead. Supposedly it's not waterproof." "Good thing your tracker is. Easy enough to recover the data. Don't worry about it for now. We're just glad you are okay. However, when I get back, we really need to talk about my frequent flyer miles." "Will do. Get back when you can." "And the others?" A short silence fell on the other end of the line, followed by muffled whispers. "We found them. Collecting them as we speak. Just get back safe, Clayton. Can you please give the phone back to the agent?" With an unsettling feeling coming over him, Clayton gave a fake smile, a wave, and a thumbs up to the fisherman, and climbed into the SUV. Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening. It is so good to see Clayton and crew on another mission. However, the ending was a little bit of a cliffhanger. I wanted to show what would happen if the crew ended up all getting snapped back instead of just Dr. Lowe. Where they all ended up, you're gonna find out in the next episode. I already have the locations and their conditions all set up. It was wonderfully done D&D style, with a D100 for their location and D20 for their conditions. And I must say, their locations and their conditions are really going to be something you're going to want to see in the next episode. I'm not going to talk too much about the AI this time, because when it came to making the script, there was a lot of back and forth going on between me and the AI and then trying to balance it all out. However, I got my steampunk story with a little bit of, if anybody remembers Captain Power from back in the days of Saturday morning cartoons, it really kind of has that feeling to it as well. So please like, comment, and subscribe to my channel, because for all of us rising creators, this is the lifeblood of our channels. So I thank you so much again for being part of this. As always, I'm on YouTube as well as Rumble, and I do have a Buy Me a Coffee link. It is truly appreciated, and your support means everything to us. And as always, it's okay to be scared sometimes. I am too. Embrace the strange, embrace possibility, embrace creativity, and I will see you in the next story.